Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity
Welcome to the
podcast.
Inspired
I'm your
Living with
host, Julie
Autoimmunity
Michelson.
podcast,
And
the
today we're
podcast
joined
for
by
high
Dr. Saima
achievers
Khan,
who want to stay
board-certified
sharp,
pediatrician
focused,
and
and full of
IMN-certified
energy
functional
despite
medicine
their
practitioner.
diagnosis. With
Dr.
your
Saima
host,
used
National
functional and
Board
integrative
Certified
medicine
Functional
to conquer
Medicine Health
narcolepsy
Coach,
when
Julie
conventional Western
Michelson,
medicine failed,
where Julie
and her
helps you
doctors
take
told
your
her they
power
had no
back
other
from
solutions for her.
autoimmunity.
She
And
recovered
now
completely,
here's your host,
got off
Julie
stimulants and drugs that were
Michelson.
leading her with severe side effects to live the life of her purpose. She now helps people with chronic illness dispel the lie that they're stuck with their diagnosis and medications, which are only a Band-Aid for their symptoms. Dr. Saima practices functional and integrative medicine virtually all over Florida at Rebalance Family Health, where she specializes in narcolepsy, mold illness, and autoimmunity. In today's conversation, Dr. Saima shares her approach to brain and body transformation, and we discuss addressing foundational basics like stress management, sleep, diet, detox, and movement to truly heal from chronic health challenges, including narcolepsy and autoimmunity. Dr. Saima, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Julie.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I always love when I know we're going to hit on something that listeners haven't heard before. We always get a different spin on stuff, and there's definitely themes that repeat. So I would love for you to share your journey. How did you go from practicing pediatrics to transitioning to functional medicine?
That's a great question. And yes, certainly a great way to start. So, I grew up in a very traditional sort of Western kind of model. I grew up in Pakistan, but my parents followed doctors there or took us to doctors there that practiced Western medicine. So we got the same kind of, medications, antibiotics, whatnot growing up. Never got exposed to anything else. And then I went to a medical school that was also, again, the training was very Western. In fact,
Sure.
our dean would come from the US. And I wanted to be a doctor from a young age. I remember in middle school, I wanted to be a doctor. So really, this was,
Wow.
my purpose. I had a big drive to be a doctor. And when I started medical school, at some point, I realized that I wanted to come to the US for further training. And pediatrics excited me. And I ended up in Michigan back in 1999 for my residency training. And, during medical school, I started feeling fatigued. And I lived in the same city and I got a dorm room because I would need to break my day with a nap. So I would
Oh
have
boy.
lunch and run to my room, take a 15-minute nap, run back for my clinicals. And that was that. I had some gut symptoms, digestive issues, not anything out of the ordinary, treated with some medications here and there. And as time went on, my fatigue grew. I got through residency. I did a residency in pediatrics. I did a fellowship in toxicology, learned all the conventional stuff that I've learned to not believe anymore. So, just that training, it just trains you to believe in things that may not always work or make you feel better temporarily. And after I got done with my residency, I worked in an ER, crazy lifestyle, midnights, eating on the go,
Sure.
eating out of the vending machine, all that kind of stuff. And I just got sicker and sicker, but nothing that decompensated me or really made me stop to think, okay, I need to do something about it. So I had hormonal issues, I had gut issues, I was feeling fatigued. I would go to my primary care physician every now and then and get a workup, and things would look kind of normal.
Looks fine.
Looks
Your
fine.
labs look good.
Your lab looks good. That usual story.
Yeah.
And so life went on. I had kids, and I was just tired. I was just having a hard time overcoming that energy deficit. And one of my daughters, she wrote down when she was in elementary school, and this little thing that they write at school, my mom loves taking naps.
No.
Because I needed naps to get by my day.
Yep.
And I ended up in Florida from Michigan about 14 years ago. We were going through some transitions. My husband was starting a new job. And at that point, I decided that was just too much for me to work as a doctor. I was just not able to keep it all together, balance my commitments as a wife, as a mom, take care of my kids and work as a physician. And prior to that, I had actually worked part-time. Once got done with my training, I just worked part-time. And I just got more and more fatigued. I did stuff, I volunteered, whatnot, but I had fatigue, I had sleepiness, and my husband was a sleep doctor, believe it or not.
Isn't that
And
always interesting?
telling me that I needed to get a sleep study.
Mm.
And finally, about 8 years ago in 2000, uh, you know, when I hit rock bottom, so to speak, when I couldn't take it anymore, was having a hard time driving. I said, okay, let's get a sleep study. So I got a sleep study, and the tech from his office called him because I had classical, so a sleep study followed by what's called an MSLT, classical textbook MSLT. That's the name of the test for narcolepsy. And I got started on stimulants. I was seeing, his associate, one stimulant after another. It would work for about 3 to 6 months, give me a lot of side effects. I would just be cranky and irritable and, lack of appetite. I would still crash in the middle of the day. With one of them, I couldn't sleep till around midnight or 1. And then I would, I had to be started on a medication to put me to sleep at night. So medication to wake me in the
Sure.
morning, medication to put me to sleep at night. I started developing high blood pressure. And that's when, I sort of started connecting the dots. Okay, is it the nighttime medication that is giving me the high blood pressure? And I stopped that, and my hypertension went away. And during this time, I was, developing other things, hormonal issues, gut issues. Um, I had a fibroid, I had a hysterectomy. So all these things are going on. And finally, when I was on my last medication for narcolepsy called Xyrem, which costs around almost $200,000 a year.
Oh my gosh.
I lasted 1 week on it. I started getting symptoms of Parkinson's
Oh
from
my
that.
gosh.
So yeah, my face, became very mask-like. I had tremors, and that had to be stopped. And that's when I knew I had to look for answers outside of what I was used to, outside of this conventional Western medicine. So, and then, one of my friends introduced me to cupping. And so that was my first experience with something out of what I was used to. I grew up with a family of doctors. My brother's a doctor. My husband has siblings that are doctors. So I was just surrounded by this culture
Mhm.
of, pills and procedures, so to
Right.
speak,
Right.
that traditional Western medicine uh, culture, and never thought of anything. And in fact, um, I was in many ways taught to look down upon other modalities of
Right.
treatment. Even in my training, I do remember functional doctors being mentioned as quacks.
Right.
And during my toxicology training. Uh, so I this is not something that I was taught to seek,
Right.
taught to look up to, or taught to think that this would actually help people. And when things fell apart for me, I started looking outside. I got cupping, I started reading books. I started off with Dr. Gundry's book, The Plant Paradox. And, it introduced such radical concepts to me at that time.
That's
I
a
thought,
that I don't know if I would recommend that that be your first entry into.
right, absolutely. But for some reason it was.
Okay.
And I mean, I've grown a lot since then.
Sure.
And then I got introduced to functional medicine by a friend who went to the same medical school as me. So
So
and
then there was a little
there was
yep.
that link, and she actually pushed me. She asked me to register for the IF Institute of Functional Medicine's first course and
Yep.
send a picture to her of my registration. So
Woohoo.
I was almost pushed into this, and I did it, and there's no looking back.
No.
So I
You can't unlearn or it's there isn't never any going back.
To totally. So, yes, so, my whole world changed. And then, during, during my recovery and during my health journey, um, I also discovered that I have mold illness. So mold was a part of that eventual decompensation. It's not the whole story, but part of the story.
Right.
So yes, so I learned from mold experts, Dr. Neil Nathan and Jill Krista. So they're also a huge part of my healing journey.
Amazing.
Yes, so that's how I ended up in functional medicine.
I love it. And how is your health now?
Uh, Totally different. I feel that I am better. I feel better than I've felt in a few decades,
Yep.
honestly. Like
Yep.
going
I
back
love
to my
it.
teens.
I love it. Oh,
And I
well,
just wish,
yeah, I know. This is why we're having these conversations so that, because I remember when I found functional medicine, it was like, well, how did I never hear about this? Like, how did I not know this was an option, and so this is one of the reasons why we do the podcast, so people can learn that there are other approaches. And I do believe, to have that Western training as a background, I mean, it's not one way or another. Ideally, you're bringing those worlds together.
yes,
And because that is, I think, a problem these days, is a lot of people can just hang a functional medicine shingle, but there's no medicine in functional. They just don't have the medical training.
absolutely. And I think that is a very important point. I really would call it more like functional and integrative medicine,
Right.
where you're integrating the modalities.
Yes.
And
Right.
I certainly do use some pharmaceuticals,
Hmm. Yeah.
and they are a part of my toolbox.
Right.
Um, and you really can't, have one without the other. So
Yeah.
it is a part that Western training is a part of my journey. It is a bit of what I still incorporate. I mean, we
Right.
do need to pull out those things when we need them.
But you ask why. You ask, why is this happening? Not
Yeah,
just,
yes.
here's a prescription as a Band-Aid. So
Yes, to
yeah,
take care of your symptoms. Yes,
I
you may
love
need
it.
to take care of those symptoms,
Right.
but you have to get to the root cause. You have to address that, because if you don't, then those underlying
It's a
problems that are
snowball.
happening in the body, they're just continuing, and the damage is just ongoing, which is what happened with me. If I had those hormonal issues way back in my teens, and then I ended up having a fibroid and a hysterectomy, so
Right.
that, the estrogen dominance, um, it was
Yeah, it
a
takes a
manifestation of that.
toll,
It takes a
right?
toll, right? If you don't do anything about it. And then the
Yeah,
gut issue, chronic SIBO,
yeah.
we're just kind of building up over time.
I want
Um,
to circle back for listeners. I want to talk a little bit about about narcolepsy, because I think it's common in the lay world when you hear narcolepsy, you think, oh, well, how would you not know you're having, weren't you falling asleep while you were driving? Or, how could you not be aware that you have narcolepsy? So can we just kind of touch on that a little bit and explain, how do you get a narcolepsy diagnosis and not know?
Absolutely. So, in medical school, I learned that narcolepsy is a condition where you have excessive daytime sleepiness, and you would have a person who would just be,
Right.
falling asleep,
Head,
dozing.
yeah.
And it does happen, but, everything in life starts slow and it progresses, and you get to that point. So,
Ah,
before you get to that point, what do you have? You have fatigue, you have sleepiness, and people would compensate, people compensate for it with
sure.
caffeine.
Yeah.
um so, coffee, multiple cups of coffee in a day, that's how I was compensating for it, and or taking a nap. And in my opinion, I think it's just an underdiagnosed condition, and that doesn't mean that, the listeners just go and get tested for narcolepsy, but it's just a manifestation of, the body not working really well, the energy production system, or, the awakening system in the body, it's not working well because of all these, hindrances
Right.
in sort of the biochemistry, looking at that level, at the cellular level, your cells are not functioning optimally.
Right.
And your mitochondria, which are your, energy producing organelles in the cells, they're not functioning. They're not generating the energy. So just like a powerhouse, you've got a power failure.
Right. Which
And
is why it's so, and again, because here I am now, 20 years ago, I might not have given it a second thought. But to think of, okay, somebody has fatigue and sleepiness, and the treatment, and I'm using quotations for people listening on audio, is we're gonna give you stimulants. We're not gonna wonder why you can't make it through the day without falling asleep. Like that, just it just seems insane now. I know it didn't,
yes,
but I wanted to touch on that because a lot of listeners, and I'm sure listeners are kind of leaning in because fatigue is such a common across the board symptom with autoimmunity, pretty much no matter, what diagnosis you have. Um, and and even not in autoimmunity. I mean, just when I think of the typical inflamed adult, fatigue is common, or energy deficiency in some respects is common, and we always, not always, often, if the criteria is met, send people for sleep studies, because with that thought of, are you oxygenating at night? Because if not, you're going to be tired during the day. But this is a kind of a new world even for me to dig in a little bit to narcolepsy, and I don't know of anybody really going that far with the testing. So I
sure.
think that, yeah,
So generally the testing gets done if, you get a sleep study and nothing comes up on it, like you don't have a sleep apnea, or
right,
if he's really thinking narcolepsy, because that overnight sleep study, that doesn't pick narcolepsy.
sure, right,
It's an additional test that has to be done. So
right,
the additional test would only get done if your overnight sleep study is negative, which
right,
is what the case was with me, or, if somebody really has an index of suspicion
right.
narcolepsy. So that's a daytime. That study's done in the daytime.
Sure. Well, that
Um,
makes sense. Yeah,
right.
and that I just am like wondering how many people have the negative sleep study, so they're just told they don't have apnea, and then this doesn't get addressed, as you said, until it progresses to a point. Eventually, it becomes clear if somebody has narcolepsy, if it's left untreated. So
Right.
yeah.
And there's so many people that take stimulants. So Provigil is a very well-known stimulant.
Hmm.
It's not like Adderall or Ritalin or vitamins, but it is, it helps you stay awake. And there
Hmm.
are many people who take Provigil even
Yeah.
without a diagnosis
Right.
of narcolepsy.
Yeah,
So
my rheumatologist offered Provigil to me years ago. And I was like,
right.
wait, that same boat. Like, you're giving me stuff to sleep, and now you want to give me like, I'm not a junkie. Like, what is going on? Why? And that was kind of toward where I was like, maybe there's I was holding at 10 prescriptions. I didn't want the 11th prescription. But so I know it is used and prescribed for people that have
That are
fatigue and
feeling,
sleepiness
yeah, that are
without
feeling.
without a diagnosis, for sure.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's a tough spot for doctors because that's just how they're trained. Like, having my husband being a sleep doctor, that's just how he was trained. And you invest all this time going through medical school and residency and training and fellowship and all that. And then you sort of get on a hamster wheel. You've got bills to pay, you've got,
Right.
your life, your kids, your family, all that. And then you're working in this system where a lot of what you do gets dictated by insurance companies.
Right.
So you really, your hands are tied. And a lot of times doctors, they're just so kind of stuck in the system, they don't have time to step out and look at other modalities. And they're also taught to think that those
Right.
modalities don't work and
Right.
there's no evidence behind them.
It's quackery.
It's
Right.
quackery, all that, right? And you're sort of brainwashed, unfortunately. And
Right. Well,
until
this is decades and decades I always ask, like, why going back, like so many doctors that I've interviewed, even though there were symptoms you normalized when you were younger, medical school, it really became clear. But it's like, why do we try to kill doctors in medical, like people who want to be doctors in medical school? Like you're not sleeping, you can't possibly be eating well, the stress is through the roof. Like all of the things that we know now will lead to illness and chronic illness is like, why are we putting people through that? And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't even matter what country. It's how
doesn't
the structure of medical school is.
it's just a world yeah, it's just a worldwide sort of a phenomena,
Yeah,
right?
it's like
Because
accepted. Like, oh,
it's
that's fine.
right.
I
Yeah.
mean, the good news is, which is unfortunate, it shouldn't be that way, but this is how functional medicine is growing, right? Is because unfortunately, because people practicing strictly in the Western model aren't getting answers for themselves. And so, we're grateful you're here.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's what happens. The patients that come to me, and I'm sure that's what you're seeing too, they've already been through so many
Oh,
different kinds of providers
yeah,
and they're not getting the results that they're looking for, or they're just getting sicker and sicker.
right,
Um, and more tired, more fatigued, all that,
right.
right? And they're looking for answers. And then, once you start fixing those underlying problems, so, and it's not just one thing. In functional medicine, we know that it's so many things. Like there's so many leaks in the roof, as Dr. Bredesen says, for dementia. Like, and I feel that applies to every single illness. Like for narcolepsy, it wasn't just one thing. I did not have an Adderall deficiency or a
Right.
vitamin deficiency,
Yeah.
but I had multiple nutritional deficiencies. And in addition, I had imbalances in my gut and hormonal imbalances and toxins. And, so I had to work on all those different things uh, to get rid of the narcolepsy symptoms and address the root causes.
And I love that you brought that up. So I happen to be Bredesen trained. I'm a Recode coach, which I don't know that I've ever mentioned on the podcast before. And I love, in case people are like, wait, why are we talking about narcolepsy? Isn't this an autoimmune podcast? It's the same. The leaks, the we need to be supporting, nutrition, hormones, reducing like all of the things, whether you have an autoimmune diagnosis, you have dementia or Alzheimer's, you have, can't pick something, anything chronic, including narcolepsy, we we need to be, taking away those blocks from healing because our body is designed to heal and supporting. And so I love that you brought that up because I know when I first got into functional medicine, you hear root cause medicine, and I thought singular, like root cause, like what is the cause of ha ha ha. And like you said, it's never just one thing,
It's
ever.
never right.
No.
And even with autoimmunity, like so Hashimoto's, that's also a part of my story. So
Ah, well, here we go. Now we're talking.
right, right. And to be honest, I don't know if, the narcolepsy, like the sleepiness, if part of that is also, autoimmune. And I suspect that it
Sure.
is. There just hasn't been, nobody's done the research.
Well, and I'm guessing if you had been diagnosed, I'm guessing were not diagnosed with Hashimoto's first.
No,
Because if
I,
you were, they probably would have totally discounted the fatigue as
yeah.
part of your autoimmune condition, right? Like, oh yeah, it's like telling a mom who knows she's not tired, fatigued, and the doctor says, "Well, of course, because you have little kids." Like, no, it's not. So that is interesting. I thank you for sharing that. You also have an autoimmune diagnosis, and I love, like me, you don't identify by your diagnoses. It's like, oh yeah, and I have that. Oh yeah, they said I had. So addressing these roots, addressing these foundations, it improves. It doesn't matter the list of diagnoses or kind of what the. I really am a firm believer in, and I'm not saying again you don't ever need medication or I always say there's this framework and we prioritize, like if you've got mold exposure and you're living in a moldy house, like we know, like we have to prioritize according to need for the individual, but we need that foundation strong.
Absolutely. And yes, and and there are many pieces to the foundation as well. And you have
Yes.
to work on all of them. And starting with the basics.
Yeah. What are your basics?
So my basics are diet and diet and lifestyle, so sleep, exercise, stress. Those are my basics. And what I've found in my own journey is that until you work on those, you could be pouring supplements or other functional treatments, but until you work on the food that is going in the body, or removing the food that your body is going to react to, like
Right.
with autoimmunity, an autoimmune paleo diet, which is what I follow. And working on the stress means stress just takes such a toll on the body, and stress can be the cause, or rather the trigger
Right.
that finally broke the camel's back, so to
Mhm.
speak, or that triggered someone's Hashimoto's or other
Right.
autoimmune condition like MS, for instance, or anything else.
RA.
Like stress can
Yep.
be a huge trigger, right?
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
and I don't know about you. I've seen, I'm an autoimmune paleo coach as well. And so, I've seen people come in with the appropriate diet for them. I've never had anybody come in where I say, your stress management routine's so great, we're not touching it. We just, especially, and I think diet's not static either, but especially we may have a routine that works for us, really well in certain time periods, and then we're going to need to up level. We just are always need to be working on stress management. I think it's that one. Not everybody has a toxin issue. Everybody has too many toxins, but for sure, chronic stress is, I think, number one.
it is. I agree. We're living in a very stressed society. Our daily routines, as adults and also children. I mean, the
Yeah.
routines have just become so stressful. There's so much demand on people to do things, and we're
Yeah.
just constantly busy. The
It's
life
not
is.
it's not a badge of honor, or it shouldn't be a badge of honor. I'm so busy, out busying each other.
It shouldn't be. And to be honest, I was one of those people, like
Sure.
busy all the time.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, this is a comment that my grandfather made when I was a kid. I think I was a teenager. He said I wouldn't even have time to die. So, because it was just a part of my nature
Right.
to be busy
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
time. So yeah. And I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in a very large city, in a developing country, but it was a large city. And
Right.
yes, this life was stressful.
Yeah.
So stress does take a toll, and you get to the point where you tip over.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's any of these things, we talk about that tipping point with toxins all the time, but it is the same. And I love that you said, and we have to work on all of it, because if you're not working on stress, well, I don't care how good your diet is, you're not absorbing your nutrients. You're
absolutely.
not going to be sleeping well, you're probably over exercising and that, so it's, you have to be working on all of them. And so I love that you highlighted that, because it's really, I've had people come in and I know it's so frustrating. So many of us start with a book or a podcast episode or a something. And I say I had the throw spaghetti at the wall approach to healing when I decided to look for another way, outside of the rheumatology office. I was trying. I would read, learn, try, listen, try. I would, and it was like I did a lot of really good things, but it wasn't until I did some of them in concert that I started to heal. And so this is why, again, we have these conversations. This is why I do what I do. It took me years to reduce my inflammation and symptoms and have my doctors. I always say my doctors took me off my medication. I didn't because I didn't need it anymore. Don't ever tell people to stop their meds. But it doesn't need to take years. It's not going to take a week, but it doesn't need to take, 6 years to start to feel better. That's for sure.
That's very true. And yes, working on the stresses, calming the nervous system down.
Yeah.
That's key, right? Like calming the body, deep breathing,
Yeah.
that progressive muscle relaxation. You really don't need it. You don't need to go out and buy anything for that,
Right.
but you need to set aside time for that to really sort of consciously work on that relaxation. And sometimes you can be doing it even while you're, doing some chores, just sort of being mindful
Hmm.
about the breathing and the belly breathing.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Or
And
even
that's
in conversation, like people don't know. I did right. I guess it had to have been 2020, right in the heart of the lockdown. I did a big training for hospital-based doctors in Pakistan.
oh,
And that was their homework was as they change patients to take 3, 4, 7 breaths just to reset that nervous system, because they're in that. And then, add COVID on top of already a high stress job. But one of the things I love about some of the just natural, we're built to use those tools. So I always say, you can't grab the tool if you don't have it in the toolbox.
right.
But once it's in the toolbox, if something is driving, you're having a stressful conversation, you can be breathing during it and not even go to that place of stress response.
That's so true. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
So
love
true.
it. Do you use that? I know sleep is one of the pillars. Um, where do you start with people? Like what are things people can do around improving sleep?
So sleep hygiene, that's something so basic. Everybody's on their phones and you have blue light coming from phones. So consciously, not using your phone at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. And then moving that bedtime to around 10 to 10:30 p.m. That should really be the latest anyone should go to sleep if they really want to reset their body and help it heal naturally. I mean, you really can't heal the body by, pushing those circadian rhythms out of what they're supposed to be doing. So our bodies have something called circadian rhythms based on the cortisol. So the natural, one of the hormones. And if we stay up till too late, then it just puts that whole system out of balance. So to rebalance the body, you need to move that bedtime to 10 to 10:30 and wake up early, with the sun in many parts of the country. So, if you get good 7 to 9 hours of sleep, um, that should be the goal, but your 7 to 9 hours should not begin at 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning or even midnight. They should begin sooner.
I love that you say that because it is so important and people do tend to, I think 10 years ago, if you ask people what do they know about sleep, they know, okay, somewhere around 8 hours, right? But it really does make a difference when you're sleeping, what time.
Right. And again, this should not be a badge of honor that,
I know 4 hours
you're
is I've
I,
met I've met so many people who say they're a super sleeper, and they don't need and there are the very rare super sleepers who don't need that 7 to 9 hours. Everybody so far that I've met that told me they were a super sleeper is not, they're not.
they're not. They're going
No,
to they are
they're running on fumes and adrenaline. Yeah.
and it's going to catch up at some time. Like I know
Yeah.
people personally who claim that they're super sleepers, but they've had a big health setback.
And they
Whether
don't connect the dots, right?
they don't.
Like,
It could be a
yeah.
cancer. It could be an autoimmune condition. It
Yeah.
could be a heart attack or something,
Well,
but
and you mentioned, brain health and Bredesen protocol, right? Like our
right.
brain is detoxing while we sleep. If you're not giving your body that time, that's when we're healing and detoxing and cleaning out and rebuilding. So
Absolutely. And
yeah,
that's one of those concepts that's not there in conventional medicine that's probably just coming around, the concept of,
yeah,
uh, so and even the whole lymphatic system is not something that, conventional medicine really teaches. I
true.
didn't think about it until I got into functional medicine and cupping. So our toxins are, removed from the brain through the lymphatic. So it's the lymphatic system of the brain. And the time when it's doing its detoxing is when we're sleeping. So just imagine the more uh, you sleep, like, within those 7 to 9 hours, the more your brain gets to detox.
Yeah,
And brain disorders, brain fog, Alzheimer's, all those things, that's also a detox issue.
right.
And my personal theory is that narcolepsy is also a toxin issue and a brain detox issue because I mean, I know mold was a piece of my story when I got some specialized testing done, which you really don't have to do for specific toxins, but I was sort of trying to learn. I mean, I did
Sure.
have a lot of other toxins on board. So getting rid of those toxins from the brain is important. And I feel like it's just the body's signal of trying to detox. Like, you're just tired and sleepy because your brain needs to detox.
I love that you said that. That is it's so brilliant. And it just reinforces what you said also about the time of night you're sleep, because it's not just sleep. We need, we need REM and we need deep sleep. Those are the stages where the good stuff is happening. And so that's what we're missing, even if we think we're getting enough sleep, but we're going to bed at 2 in the morning. Like you're not getting that restorative sleep that you need.
Right. And it's unfortunate that a lot of those behaviors start when, kids are little or in high school or in college and somehow and I mean, I don't, I feel like, some of the sort of the writings or the data that's out there, I mean, people talk about teenagers need having to have that altered
Right.
circadian rhythm. And
Their circadian rhythm's
yeah,
different. Yeah.
and I'm not
Is
sure if
it?
that's really true, to be honest.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it's just like that conventional Western kind of a concept. But I really feel that our bodies are designed to work a certain way.
Well,
And
the sun,
yeah,
the earth and the sun are not changing just because you're a teenager, right? So the sun, now that I never really gave it much thought when my kids were teenagers, I did wish that high school started later. Um, but I see what you're saying, and logically it wouldn't make sense. Why would our circadian rhythm, if it's set, if it's connected to the cycles of nature, why would it be different at a certain period of growth? It doesn't make sense.
right. I mean, I feel like the circadian rhythm needs to be there. Maybe kids need more sleep at that time because that's just a time of their life and they're growing
Well,
and
they're growing
and that,
exponentially,
right.
sure.
And the metabolic needs are more. So
Yeah,
they need to sleep more, but the timing doesn't need to shift
yeah,
to to later at night.
right.
And you
Yeah,
see that everywhere, unfortunately. Like you see it in the US, you see it outside. I mean, it's just sort of become like a worldwide culture, um, wherever you have, artificial light and
yeah,
phones and
right. Well, and
gadgets.
and that's these days. I mean, teenagers are on screens, phones, tablets, laptops, video games. I mean, you name it, and all, it's all day and all night. They're getting bombarded. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I love that. See, because back then, see, there's another thing I get to shift perspective on. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense. And and all those things catch up. Like I was a night owl through high school. I mean, starting in high school. So if you don't pay attention to all those things, and if you don't sort of train, your families, your children,
Right.
which is hard, being a mom of two teens and a young adult and a teen, those things are hard because your children are also surrounded by this culture,
Right.
but those things do catch up. Like I know they
Yeah.
caught up with me. So
Well, and they'll, I know, I remember, I have three also that are close together, and it was different when they were teenagers. They've all had their own kind of chronic health stuff to navigate, and now that they're all in their 20s, like none of them stay up late intentionally, like if their regular schedules are, which is still unusual in their in their age group, right?
right,
But they're like,
right.
nope, peace out. I need to get my rest, because they know if they're chasing that other kind of lifestyle, they're going to get sick, because
Absolutely.
they've worked too hard to get inflammation down. So,
Absolutely.
so eventually it's always that it's a great moment when, the kids get old enough to then the things you've modeled and taught, I think it's nature. They rebel against it a little bit, and then it's just a beautiful thing when they're older and they're like, oh, they may not even say it out loud, but if they just start showing you that they're eating well, they're sleeping well, it's like, oh,
And yes, that's a great point, and I hope my kids get there.
they will.
It's almost like an elimination diet. When you take those things out of your diet and you introduce them,
Right.
your body feels it. So once you've reset your circadian rhythm and you're sleeping, you know, 10:30, and you have that odd day when you don't,
Yeah.
then you feel it the next day.
Yeah.
So, um,
Well, and I'm gonna throw my partner under the bus here. I always thought he was a night owl. He always thought he was a night owl. And when he moved in, there was no question. I'm not going to even pretend or try to be a night owl. And I'd say, I'm going to bed, and oh, I'll go too. I'm like, no, you don't have to, 'cause I really did think he was a night owl. He would go to bed between 12 and 2. And I'm telling you, he falls asleep before I do. It doesn't matter how early I head in. He was never a night owl. It was that habitual, busy, busy, busy until like I just can't. And then I'm going
right.
to sleep. And he's a doctor.
Oh,
But now
doctors.
he knows. But so it's, we tell ourselves stories because we have habits and patterns. And it's not necessarily because our nature is driving that, it's that we've trained our bodies.
Absolutely. And sometimes, the way we grew up, or, our families, how everybody else was, so all that plays a role.
Yeah.
Friends, all
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. I love it. Amazing. So we've already covered so much, but here's your opportunity to either pull something new or highlight whatever you want. What is one step that listeners can take starting today to improve their health?
So they can start by moving their bodies.
Okay.
Movement is not one of those things that I grew up with, unfortunately. And like I said, everything adds up. I was never into sports, and exercising was not one of those things that I did on a
Right.
regular basis. And movement, one, it releases endorphins, your brain chemicals that make you feel better. And the second thing is that it helps with detox also. So your lymphatics, they move. Your lymphatics don't have the ability to sort of pump the lymph
Yeah.
naturally. So movement helps uh, the lymph
That's how
move.
they work. You
That's how
have
they
to be
work.
moving.
Start small. If you're really sick and fatigued and
Right.
you have a lot of pain, then it could just be moving around the house.
Right.
Uh, do what you can, but start moving.
I love
Uh,
it.
and I mean, these are just some basic things that you can do to start getting better. And baby steps, you don't have to just jump and do everything, in one day or one week, but
Right.
start where you can.
I love
That's
it. Yeah,
that's
and
really
don't
important.
overdo it because that's not going to support you. It'll drive inflammation. So I love that your language is the same as mine, that you say movement, because a lot of people, when you say exercise, we all hold a different, whatever the picture is that flies, so we're not talking about CrossFit or, a high intensity anything or aerobic. It's just moving.
That's
And like you said, it can be just moving around the house. I have to remind people all the time, like, you know, there's so much that we either enjoy that includes movement, and we don't think of it that way, or that we're doing in our day. And if we did a little more, then we're increasing our movement. So I love that. Yay.
right.
So before we wrap up, for people listening on the go, where's the best place for them to find you?
So my practice is in Florida. So currently I can see patients in Florida. So you have to
Okay.
be physically present in Florida for your first visit. Otherwise, I have a
Who
completely
doesn't want to go to Florida? Come on.
and I'm in the Orlando area. So, and my areas of interest, obviously narcolepsy, mold illness, which is a part of my personal journey. So I do specialize in mold, and then autoimmunity. So all those are conditions that I treat and specialize in. And I have a virtual practice. It's called Rebalance Family Health. My website is going through some updates right now, but there is a link to
Perfect.
schedule a call if you're in Florida.
Awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank
Well,
you so, so much. You have given us amazing gold today, and I'm really glad we got to explore a whole new topic on the show and learn more about narcolepsy and find out that yet again, this is another thing that by addressing foundations, we get to heal. So
absolutely. And there
thank
is an autoimmune connection in all likelihood.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll learn more, as research advances and thinking shifts. We'll
Yes.
we'll connect some more of those dots, but it kind of doesn't matter because from experience and practice that we can heal. So
Yes, absolutely.
amazing. Dr. Saima, thank you so very much.
Thank you too, Julie.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.